Jax Vander's eyelids felt like they were glued shut, probably a side effect of being popsicle-fied for who knows how long. Cryogenic sleep, they said, like it was supposed to be some kind of spa treatment, but he always woke up feeling like he'd been run over by a freighter. The freezing air hit him like a slap, not the gentle kind you might get from a friend, but more like the kind your pissed-off ex gives you after finding out about that innocent night out with the boys. "Ugh, someone's paying for this," he grumbled, voice creaking like an old door hinge. The sound bounced around the small pod, a metal coffin that had kept him from becoming space dust. He fumbled for the release switch, cursing every engineer who ever thought inconvenient was synonymous with innovative. The lid hissed open, a breath of stale air rushing past him. "Hello, sunshine," he muttered, greeting the gray, sickly sky with all the enthusiasm of a man who just remembered he left the oven on. The planet, whatever its name was, hadn't improved since he last saw it in the mission brief. Desolate, barren, so inviting that even the local diseases probably packed up and left. Jack swung his legs over the edge of the pod and landed on the ground with all the grace of a drunken rhino. "Nice place," he snorted, taking in the cracked earth and skeletal trees dotting the landscape. It was the sort of place you'd expect to find a villain's lair, minus any interesting architecture or, well, anything interesting at all. His ship, the Misfit, sat half-buried in the dirt a few paces away. It looked about as well as he felt, scorch marks decorating its hull like some avant-garde art piece. "Good to see you again, you ugly bastard," he said, patting the ship's side like one would a loyal but particularly mangy dog. The mission was simple, or at least, that's what they told him. Wake up, explore, find a legendary weapon that was supposedly powerful enough to make entire civilizations wet themselves. Easy peasy, right? Except they forgot to mention the waking up on a planet straight out of a post-apocalyptic fashion show part. He fished out a communicator from his pocket, hoping to get some intel before he started wandering aimlessly like a lost tourist. "Come on, give me something," he whispered, smacking it a few times against his palm like the abuse might coax it into functioning. Static. Great. Just great. The planet had been split in half by an ancient war, or so the legends claimed. Jax wasn't much for legends, but credits were credits, and the pay was enough to keep him interested. He'd heard the stories about this place. Who hadn't? A civilization with technology so advanced they could have turned the universe into one big theme park. Then boom, one too many arguments over who drank the last of the coffee, and here we are. "Time to get to work," Jax murmured, heading toward the distant shadow of what might have been a structure. Or maybe it was just another rock formation. Either way, it beat standing around waiting for inspiration to strike like a lightning bolt to the brain. The ground crunched under his boots, every step a reminder that this was a place forgotten by time and sanity. The air had a bite to it, like it resented the fact he was even breathing it. Or maybe he was just paranoid, came with the job description. As he walked, Jax couldn't help but notice the occasional piece of metal jutting out from the earth, relics of a time when this place was more than just a forgotten stain on the universe's underpants. He kicked at a rusted piece, sending it skittering across the ground. Wonder what their Yelp reviews look like, he mused. The structure loomed closer, and he could finally make out details. It was definitely something, though whether it was friendly or run-for-your-life material was still up for debate. It stood crooked, leaning like it had just come out of a bar fight with gravity and lost. Vines wrapped around it, nature reclaiming what had been hers all along. "Oh, look, it's nature's little reclamation project," he quipped, climbing through what used to be a window. Inside, it was dim and full of shadows, the kind that seemed to swallow you whole if you weren't careful. Jax's footsteps echoed as he moved deeper, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. Here and there, he spotted remnants of the past, broken machinery, faded signs in a language even his translator didn't recognize. "Hope they didn't write anything important," he said to nobody in particular. He reached what looked like a control room, or maybe it was just a really elaborate janitor's closet. The consoles were dead, their surfaces coated in a thick layer of dust. Jax wiped a hand across one, revealing more alien script. "You'd think they'd at least leave a map," he said, letting the dust fall through his fingers. Something glinted at the edge of his vision, barely noticeable in the half-light. Curious, he moved towards it, kicking debris aside. It was a panel slightly ajar. "Well, well, what have we here?" he murmured, prying it open. Inside was a small device, blinking weakly like it had been on its last leg for centuries. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. It looked like some kind of data storage or maybe a really elaborate paperweight. "Guess we'll find out," he said, pocketing it. "If we're lucky, it won't explode." With nothing else of interest, he made his way back outside. The sky had darkened further and the wind was picking up, whispering secrets he couldn't understand. "Nice to know even the weather's in on the conspiracy," he muttered. As he trudged back to the Misfit, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Could just be paranoia, or maybe this place had more surprises in store. He glanced over his shoulder but saw nothing except the creeping shadows. "Must be losing it," he sighed, reaching the ship. The only company he had was the occasional screech of some unseen creature, probably just as lost and miserable as he was. Inside, he set the device on the console, connecting it to the ship's systems. "Let's see if you're worth the trouble," he said, hoping for a miracle. The screen flickered to life, displaying a jumble of characters that looked like they were trying to form a protest but couldn't decide on a cause. Jax leaned back, massaging his temples. "Great, just what I needed, a crossword puzzle from hell." He tapped a few buttons, trying every trick he knew to coax something coherent from the chaos. "Come on, you've got to have something." The screen shifted, finally displaying an image, a map of the planet or at least a portion of it, and there, marked with an ominous red dot, was a location. "Well, that's not suspicious at all," he said, staring at it. He couldn't help but grin, the kind of grin that said this is probably a terrible idea, but what the hell? It was a lead, and in their line of work, leads were as rare as a sober pilot. "Guess it's time to go sightseeing," he said, checking his gear. As he prepared to leave, he paused, looking back at the ship. "Don't wait up," he quipped, and with that he stepped into the unknown, ready to uncover whatever secrets this forsaken world had buried. Little did he know, he wasn't the only one eager to uncover the past. High above, hidden among the clouds, a pair of eyes watched his every move, calculating, waiting. The hunt was on, and Jax Vander had just become the most interesting prey in the universe. Jax Vander stared at the blinking map on the screen, that ominous red dot taunting him like a hangover after a cheap night out. "Looks like I'm not the only one with a questionable sense of direction," he muttered, squinting at the alien symbols as if they'd suddenly morph into something useful, like a cheeseburger menu. The Misfit hummed in the background, a comforting symphony of creaks and groans that told him it was still hanging on by a thread. Kind of like him, really. He grabbed his gear, double-checking the trusty old blaster that had saved his skin more times than he cared to count. "Don't fail me now," he whispered to it, as if sweet-talking a lover. It probably had more personality than most of his exes anyway. Outside, the planet greeted him with the same warmth as an angry mother-in-law. The wind whipped around him, carrying with it the scent of dust and desolation. "Lovely day for a stroll," he said, shouldering his pack and heading in the direction the map had indicated. Each step crunched against the barren earth, a reminder that he was walking on the bones of a civilization that had hit the self-destruct button a little too enthusiastically. The walk was uneventful, just him and his shadow, which was about as lively as a funeral procession. He couldn't shake the feeling that the planet was watching him, like it had its own set of eyes hidden in the cracks and crevices. "Paranoid much, Jax," he said to himself, shaking off the feeling like a dog after a bath. Eventually, he reached what appeared to be an entrance to an underground facility. The door was half buried under rubble, like the planet had tried to swallow it whole. "Subtle," he commented, prying it open with a grunt. The door protested with a metallic screech that could wake the dead, not that anyone around here was waking up anytime soon. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the kind of silence that presses on your eardrums and makes you wonder if your heart beats a drum solo. Jax flicked on a flashlight, the beam cutting through the murk like a knife. The corridor stretched out in front of him, a tunnel leading to God knows where. "This isn't ominous at all," he said, stepping inside. As he moved deeper, the walls began to hum with a low, steady vibration. It was almost comforting, like the planet's version of a lullaby, albeit one sung by a very drunk and slightly unhinged singer. And then he heard it, a voice, soft and melodic, echoing through the corridor like the ghost of a pop star past. "Welcome, traveler," it said, the words wrapping around him like a velvet rope at a dive bar. "I am T. Lara, the guardian of this place." Jack stopped, raising an eyebrow. "T. Lara, huh? What kind of guardian takes a nap while their charge goes to hell?" There was a pause, then T. Lara's voice returned, a trace of amusement in its tone. "I assure you I was not napping. My functions were merely interrupted." "Right," Jack said, continuing forward. "And I'm the emperor of the galaxy. Mind telling me why I've got a big red dot on my map, or is that another one of those interrupted functions?" The walls pulsed gently, as if considering his question. "The red dot marks the location of a device of significant power, one that can change the course of history." "Great, just what I need," Jax muttered. "Another doomsday device. Cause those always end well." He turned a corner, the corridor opening into a larger chamber, dimly lit by flickering lights that seemed to be on their last gasp. T. Lara's voice followed him, a ghostly companion. "You are not the only one who seeks this power. There are others, ones who would use it to less noble ends." "Noble, huh?" Jax chuckled, stepping over a pile of debris that had once been a console. "I'm just here for the paycheck, lady. I leave the nobility to the folks who wear capes and spandex." The chamber was filled with the remnants of alien technology, panels and screens that blinked sporadically, like they were trying to communicate but had forgotten how to speak. He approached one of the more intact-looking consoles, squinting at the alien script. "So, T. Lara, any chance you've got a translation handy? My alien's a bit rusty." A soft glow illuminated the screen, words shifting into something his brain could almost recognize. "I am capable of providing guidance, yes," T. Lara said, her voice a soothing presence in the otherwise eerie silence. "Fantastic," Jax said, tapping at the console. "Now how about that lurking threat? Should I be worried about someone jumping out of the shadows and trying to sell me insurance?" T. Lara's laughter was a soft chime, echoing through the chamber. "The threat is real, I assure you. A faction known as the Shadow Collective seeks the same power you do. They are relentless, and they will stop at nothing to achieve their goals." "Shadow Collective, huh?" Jax said, adjusting his grip on his blaster. "Sounds like a bad rock band. Let me guess, they wear a lot of black and have a thing for dramatic entrances." "Something like that," T. Lara answered. "They believe the weapon will give them control over the remnants of this world, and through that, influence over the galaxy itself." "Overachievers," Jax muttered, scanning the room for anything useful. "Can't they just stick to collecting stamps like normal psychopaths?" A flash of metal caught his eye, buried under the rubble. He knelt, uncovering a small device not unlike the one he'd found earlier. "Well, look at you," he said, inspecting it. "Got a twin brother, do you?" He pocketed the device, figuring it might come in handy or at least make a nice paperweight back on the misfit. "All right, T. Lara, any parting wisdom before I skip off to find this fancy weapon?" "Be cautious, traveler," T. Lara said, her tone serious now. "The road ahead is fraught with danger, and the Shadow Collective will not hesitate to eliminate anyone in their path." Jax gave the chamber one last look, feeling a mix of curiosity and dread. "Sounds like a party. I'll be sure to bring the chips and dip," he said, heading toward the exit. "Thanks for the heads up, T. Lara." As he made his way back through the corridors, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that he was marching headlong into a mess bigger than he'd signed up for. But then again, wasn't that just a regular Tuesday for him? He stepped outside into the biting wind, glancing up at the darkening sky. It was a long walk back to the Misfit, and as he trudged through the barren landscape, he found himself scanning the horizon, half expecting to see the Shadow Collective leaping out from behind a rock, ready to monologue him to death. But the land remained silent, save for the howling wind and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. Reaching the Misfit felt like coming home, or at least coming back to that one apartment that always smelled slightly of old socks and disappointment. He climbed aboard, the familiar creaks welcoming him back like an old friend. Inside, he set the second device on the console next to the first, the two blinking in what he could only assume was a rhythm. "All right, you two," he said, tapping a few buttons. "Show me what you've got." The screens flickered, alien symbols dancing across them in a frenetic waltz. Jax watched, half interested, half expecting the whole thing to explode in his face. Come on," he muttered, willing the ancient tech to cough up something useful. The symbols coalesced into a map, larger and more detailed than the one before. It showed the planet's surface, marking several locations with the same ominous red dot. "So, we've got options," Jax said, leaning back. "Always nice to have options, even if they are all probably terrible." But one location stood out, a pulsing red beacon that seemed to demand his attention. It was deeper into the planet, far beyond the facility he just explored. "Looks like that's where the action is," Jax said, committing the route to memory. "Hope they're serving cocktails." He stood, stretching out the kinks in his back, and grabbed his gear. The Misfit hummed in the background, a comforting reminder that he wasn't quite alone in this god-forsaken corner of the universe. "All right, old girl," he said to the ship, patting its console. "Time to earn our keep." With one last look at the blinking lights, he stepped outside, the wind biting at his cheeks like a particularly aggressive ant. The trek ahead was daunting, but Jax felt a flicker of excitement beneath the cynicism and sarcasm that had become his life's soundtrack. The weapon was out there, waiting, and so was the Shadow Collective, like a bad smell that just wouldn't fade. But he was Jax Vander, and if there was one thing he knew how to do, it was dive headfirst into the chaos and come out the other side, preferably without any new holes in his body. "Let's get this over with," he muttered to himself, setting off toward the horizon where danger and destiny waited, probably flipping a coin to see who got to mess with him first. Jax trudged across the barren expanse, each step kicking up dust like some demented parade float dragging its feet. The wind howled in his ears, screaming like a banshee with a hangover. He could almost hear it mocking him, every gust a wheezy laugh at his expense. "Should have brought a kite," he muttered, squinting against the stinging grit. The planet was as stable as a politician's promise, shifting and rumbling underfoot with the enthusiasm of a drunk trying to do the cha-cha. It was like the world was trying to shuffle him off its surface, a bad date eager to slam the door in his face. "Can't say I blame it," Jax said to no one in particular. "I'm not exactly a catch." As he pressed on, the sky darkened, clouds swirling overhead like a cosmic toilet bowl. Lightning flickered in the distance, a natural firework display that seemed far too cheerful for the grim surroundings. It was as if the universe had decided that if it was going to kill him, it might as well put on a show. Jax's comlink crackled to life, startling him from his thoughts. He fumbled with it, half expecting T-Lara's spectral voice to start belting out show tunes. Instead, it was merely static, the cosmic equivalent of a bad radio station. "Well, at least I'm not missing out on top 40 hits," he grumbled, adjusting the device until the hissing subsided. The ground beneath him shifted again, a deep tremor that felt like the planet's way of saying, "Hey, buddy, don't get too comfortable." He stumbled, catching himself with a curse. Was that earthquake or indigestion? He wondered aloud. Maybe I should have packed some antacids. He reached a ridge, peering over the edge at the landscape below. It was a mess of jagged rocks and craters, the kind of place that would make a masochist smile. Lovely spot for a picnic, he said dryly. Just needs a few skulls on sticks to complete the look. Jax checked his navigation device, the screen flickering with all the reliability of a light bulb in a horror movie. The red dot that marked his destination pulsed ominously, a malignant beacon in the middle of nowhere. "Come and get me," it seemed to taunt. "If you've got the guts, that is." He started down the slope, his footing uncertain on the loose rubble. Every step sent stones clattering into the abyss, a sound that echoed in the silence like the planet's laughter. "I'm starting to think this rock has a sense of humor," he muttered. Too bad it's the kind that'd bomb at open mic night. The air was heavier now, thick with an electric charge that set his nerves on edge. It felt like walking into a room right before a fight broke out, tension hanging in the air like a bad smell. "Lovely," he said, glancing at the storm clouds roiling above. "Just what I needed." Atmospheric mood lighting. As Jax continued his descent, he noticed something odd amid the broken terrain. A series of symbols etched into the rock face, their lines filled with a soft, otherworldly glow. He stopped, curiosity piqued despite himself. "Well, hello there," he said, brushing the dust from the carvings. "Who's been doodling?" The glyphs were alien, their meaning elusive yet strangely familiar, like a melody you can't quite place. Jack squinted, trying to make sense of them. "It's like hieroglyphics meets a Rorschach test," he said, tracing a finger along the lines. "Not exactly bedtime reading material." With a sigh, he activated his translation device, hoping it could shed some light on the mystery. The device beeped, its screen flickering as it processed the symbols. Finally, the text scrawled across the screen, each word appearing with all the grace of a drunk uncle at a wedding. "Beware," it read. "Danger ahead." Jax chuckled, the sound harsh in the stillness. "Yeah, no kidding," he said, glancing at the storm above. "Thanks for the heads up, rock wall. Next you'll be telling me water's wet." But there was more. Beneath the warning, another set of glyphs glowed softly, their message incomplete yet compelling. "Key to power," it read. "Only the worthy." "Ah, so we're doing the whole only the chosen one SH stick," Jax said with a smirk. "Guess I'll have to fake it till I make it." He tapped the translation device, saving the information for later. Whatever these symbols were, they were tied to the weapon, and that meant he'd have to play the role of the reluctant hero a little longer. "Hope they don't ask for my resume," he muttered, continuing down the path. The planet's instability seemed to worsen with every step. Small rocks tumbled around him like a clumsy ballet, the ground beneath his feet shifting with malicious intent. It was as if the world itself had decided to make this trek as miserable as possible, a cosmic prank at his expense. "Just keep moving, Jax," he told himself. "One foot in front of the other. Try not to die." The terrain leveled out at last, opening into a vast, barren plain that stretched toward the horizon. In the distance, he could see a structure rising from the dust, its silhouette jagged and imposing against the darkening sky. It looked like the kind of place where bad things happened on a regular basis, the kind of place where heroes met their end. "Home sweet home," Jax said, setting off across the plain. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the planet was trying to drag him down. But he pressed on, the promise of the weapon drawing him forward like a moth to a particularly unpleasant flame. The storm was closing in now, the wind, a relentless force that clawed at him with icy fingers. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the landscape in stark relief. He could feel the electricity in the air, a tangible presence that made his hair stand on end. Just need a little more time, he thought, focusing on the structure ahead. Just a little longer. He reached it sooner than expected, the building looming above him like a giant ready to swat him away. It was ancient, its walls cracked and weathered by time, yet there was a sense of power emanating from it, a hum that resonated deep within his bones. "Well, here we are," Jax said, standing before the entrance. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding, shall we?" The door was massive, a slab of metal that looked like it could withstand a direct hit from an asteroid. "Subtlety wasn't exactly your strong suit, was it?" he remarked, examining the control panel beside it. The interface was alien, yet the symbols were similar to those he'd seen earlier, a series of lines and curves that seemed to shift under his gaze. Jax reached for his translation device, only to have it sputter and die with a pitiful beep. "Perfect," he said, shaking it as if that might somehow coax it back to life. "Guess I'll have to do this the old-fashioned way." He studied the symbols, trying to piece them together like a puzzle. It felt like trying to decipher a bad joke in a language he barely understood. But slowly, ever so slowly, the meaning began to coalesce in his mind, the glyphs revealing their secret. "Enter," they read. "Worthy shall pass." "Guess that's my cue," Jax said, pressing the sequence into the console. For a moment, nothing happened. He stood there, half expecting the door to laugh in his face and slam shut. But then, with a groan like the world's oldest door hinge, it began to open. The interior was dark, shadows creeping along the walls like living things. Jack stepped inside, the air cool and stale, carrying the faint scent of decay. It was the kind of place that screamed, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter," but he was fresh out of hope anyway. Ahead, the corridor stretched into the darkness, the walls lined with more glyphs that glowed softly in the dim light. "Cozy," Jack said, his voice echoing in the silence. "Just needs a fresh coat of paint and maybe some houseplants." He moved forward cautiously, the floor beneath him vibrating with a steady hum. It was like walking through the belly of some great beast, the walls alive with a low, steady pulse. "Feels like I'm walking into a trap," Jax thought. Wouldn't be the first time. The corridor opened into a chamber, the space dominated by a massive console set against one wall. It blinked with the same frenetic energy as the devices he'd found earlier, a chaotic dance of light and sound. "Looks like the control room," Jax said, approaching the console. "Of what, though?" He activated the console, the screens flickering to life with a cascade of alien text. It was a mess of symbols and numbers, a jumble that made his head spin. But there, amidst the chaos, he saw it, a schematic of the weapon, a device of unimaginable power. "Well, would you look at that," he said, leaning closer. "Guess this is what all the fuss is about." The schematic was detailed, showing the weapon's components and function in excruciating detail. It was a marvel of engineering, a testament to the lost civilization's prowess. But there was something else as well, a warning that flashed repeatedly across the screen. "Instability increasing," it read. "Planetary collapse imminent." Jax felt his stomach drop, the words hitting him like a punch to the gut. "Of course," he said, laughing bitterly. "Of course the damn thing's about to blow." Why wouldn't it be? He studied the schematic, searching for a way to stabilize the weapon. There had to be something, some way to prevent the planet from tearing itself apart. But the text was a jumble, the symbols shifting faster than he could comprehend. Come on," he muttered, frantically tapping at the controls. "Just give me something to work with." The console beeped, a series of options appearing on the screen. Jack scanned them quickly, his eyes locking onto one in particular, a failsafe, a last-ditch effort to stabilize the weapon. "That'll do," he said, activating the sequence. The room shuddered, a low rumble that resonated through the walls. The screens flickered, the lights dimming and brightening in rapid succession. "Hold together, damn you," Jax whispered, watching the console with bated breath. For a moment he thought it was working. The rumbling subsided, the lights stabilizing as the failsafe engaged. But then, with a shudder that nearly knocked him off his feet, the planet rebelled, a deep, resonant quake that threatened to tear the chamber apart. "Plan B, then," Jax said, bracing himself against the console. "Time to get the hell out of Dodge." He turned, sprinting for the exit as the walls began to collapse around him. The ground buckled, chunks of stone crashing to the floor in a cacophony of noise and dust. The storm outside raged on, the lightning illuminating the chaos in stark, brilliant flashes. Jax bolted into the corridor, the ground shifting beneath him like a living thing. The path back was treacherous, debris blocking his way at every turn. But he pressed on, driven by a primal instinct to survive, to escape the planet's impending doom. The door loomed ahead, a beacon of salvation in the chaos. Jax reached it just as another quake hit, the tremor sending him sprawling. He scrambled to his feet, heart pounding, and hurled himself through the threshold. Outside, the storm reached a fever pitch, the wind howling with all the fury of a trapped animal. Jax staggered away from the structure, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He could feel the planet dying beneath his feet, a slow and agonizing death that threatened to take him with it. But he kept moving, each step a defiance of the chaos around him. The misfit was his goal, his sanctuary, and nothing would stop him from reaching it. Not the storm, not the crumbling ground, not even his own exhaustion. As he ran, the realization hit him he'd have to go back. The weapon was still out there, the power still untapped. He couldn't leave it for the Shadow Collective to find, to use. Guess I'll have to save the universe after all, he thought, a wry smile on his lips. Jax reached the ship, collapsing against its side in a fit of laughter. It was a mad, hysterical sound, the laughter of a man who'd cheated death one too many times. He clambered aboard, the misfit's familiar groans greeting him like an old friend. He had a plan now, a purpose. The weapon was calling and he would answer. But first he needed a drink, and maybe a nap. Here's to tomorrow. Jax leaned against the misfit's hull, catching his breath while the storm threw a tantrum around him. He wasn't exactly a fan of dying, and he'd narrowly avoided it so many times he figured death would eventually get tired and take a break. "This is why I hate Mondays," he muttered, wiping sweat and grime from his brow. The misfit's creaky door opened with its usual protest, and Jax took a moment to appreciate the sweet smell of old metal and burnt circuits that wafted out. It was like coming home to a dysfunctional family reunion where everyone pretended to get along. "Missed me, didn't you?" he said to no one in particular as he stepped inside, the familiar hum of the ship soothing his frayed nerves. As he powered up the comms, the static crackled with the enthusiasm of an obnoxious neighbor's late-night party. But this time, there was something else, a voice breaking through the noise. "Repeat, this is Dr. Saren of the Shadow Collective. We know you're out there, Vander. The weapon is yours." Jax's eyes rolled so hard he could almost see his brain. "Great, just what I needed, a fan club," he snarked, adjusting the frequency to clear up the signal. Dr. Saren's voice had the kind of smugness only achievable after years of winning at evil bingo. "You can't possibly understand the power at stake here, Jax," Saren continued, voice dripping with condescension. "The weapon is far beyond anything you or your primitive mind could handle." Jax chuckled, leaning back in the misfit's captain's chair, which was really more of a dented throne of questionable comfort. "Yeah, well, I've never been good with responsibility. Ask my ex." There was a pause, the kind that suggested Dr. Saren was resisting the urge to strangle someone. "I offer you a deal, Vander. Hand over the weapon and I might let you walk away, might." Jax grinned, though there was little humor in it. "Oh, Dr. Saren, I'd love to negotiate, but I'm a bit busy trying not to die at the moment." "Rain check." A chuckle came through the comms like the sound of a cat playing with a mouse before lunch. "Keep playing your games, Vander. But remember, the Shadow Collective doesn't lose." The comms went dead, leaving Jax alone with his thoughts and the misfit's ever-present noises. "Well, they sure don't lack confidence," he muttered, standing up and pacing the small cockpit. He needed to think, to figure out how to get to the weapon before Saren and his goons did. The planet was still doing its best impression of a chaotic amusement park ride outside, rain pounding against the misfit like a drummer with anger issues. Jax stared out at the storm, mind racing. If Saren wanted the weapon so badly, it was either incredibly valuable or dangerously unstable. Or both. Probably both. "All right, think, Jax," he said, rubbing his temples. "Doctor, evil wannabe wants the weapon, which means I definitely can't let him have it. But how the hell am I supposed to get to it first with this stupid storm in the way?" he groaned, slumping back into his seat. "This is why I need a sidekick. Someone to do all the thinking while I just shoot things." The misfit's console beeped, an unwelcome reminder that time was running out. Jax pulled up the planet's schematics again, trying to pinpoint where the weapon was hidden. The blueprints showed an underground network of tunnels stretching out like a spider's web beneath the surface. "Of course, it's underground," he grumbled. "Because things are never easy, are they?" He needed to move, and fast. If Saren and his merry band of jerks were already on their way, Jax had to be one step ahead. He gathered his gear, blaster, some rations, and the world's most unreliable navigation device, and headed back out into the storm. The planet was still trying its best to kill him, but Jax had a plan now. Sort of. As he trudged through the muck, the wind howling in his ears, he couldn't help but reflect on how ridiculous his life had become. "All this for a weapon that might blow up in my face," he said aloud. "Should have stayed in bed today." The entrance to the tunnels was half buried under debris, just as welcoming as a vampire's lair at sunrise. Jax's heart pounded in time with the rumbling ground beneath his feet as he approached, feeling like he was about to enter the bowels of hell itself. "Knock, knock," he muttered, forcing the door open with a grunt and slipping inside. The air was cooler here, the sense of earth and decay mingling in a way that made him wrinkle his nose. The tunnels were dimly lit by flickering lights, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. Jax moved cautiously, his blaster at the ready. The last thing he needed was to stumble into an ambush and end up a cautionary tale about curiosity and cats. His footsteps echoed in the silence, each step drawing him closer to the weapon and to whatever Saren had planned. Jax's mind raced with possibilities, none of them particularly comforting. What if the weapon was a trap? What if Saren was right and he couldn't control its power? What if his blaster jammed at the worst possible moment? "Relax, Jax," he told himself, trying to keep the panic at bay. "You've faced worse odds before." He turned a corner and found himself in a larger chamber, the kind that screamed bad things happen here. The walls were lined with consoles, most of them dark, but a few hummed with a quiet energy that set Jax's teeth on edge. And there, standing with all the poise of a villain who'd just rehearsed his monologue, was Dr. Saren. Tall, with a face that looked like it hadn't smiled in years, he regarded Jax with an expression of mild disdain. "Ah, Vander, I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost." Saren's voice was smooth, the kind that belonged to a snake oil salesman or a politician. "Funny," Jax replied, keeping his blaster trained on the doctor. "I was gonna say the same thing about you." Saren spread his hands in a gesture of mock innocence. "I prefer to think of it as taking the scenic route," Jax snorted. "Yeah, well, I'm not here for the view, I'm here for the weapon." Saren's eyes narrowed, a glint of amusement in them. "Still clinging to the notion you can handle it, I see. Admirable if foolish." "Foolish is my middle name," Jax said with a grin. "Now how about you step aside and let me do the hero thing?" Saren chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down Jax's spine. "You really think you can outsmart both me and the weapon's creators? You must have quite the ego." "I prefer to call it confidence." "Now, are we gonna do this the easy way or the hard way?" The doctor tilted his head, seemingly considering Jax's question. "Oh dear Vander, I think you'll find there's only ever the hard way." With a flick of his wrist, Saren activated the room's defenses. Alarms blared, and panels in the walls opened to reveal turrets that whirred to life, locking onto Jax with an unsettling precision. "Well, that's just great," Jax muttered, diving behind a console as the turrets opened fire. "Could have just said no, Saren." The turrets spat laser fire, the air crackling with the sound of burning ozone. Jax returned fire, his trusty blaster doing its best impression of a pea shooter against an elephant. "Come on, work with me here," he shouted, as if his blaster would suddenly develop a mind of its own and hatch a brilliant plan. But it didn't. It just fired over and over as Jax darted from cover to cover, trying to figure out his next move. Saren watched from the safety of a control booth, a bemused expression on his face. "You can't win, Vander. The weapon will be mine." Jax gritted his teeth, focusing on survival rather than the futility of his situation. If I had a credit for every time I've heard that, he thought, dodging another volley of laser fire. Overhead, the ceiling trembled, debris raining down as the planet's instability made an encore appearance. The room felt like it was on the verge of tearing itself apart, and Jax knew he had to act fast. He took a deep breath, counting his options, none of which were particularly appealing. Then it hit him, the schematics he'd seen before. There had been a series of fail-safes, emergency overrides built into the weapon systems. If he could reach the main console, he might have a shot at disabling the turrets and stopping Saren in his tracks. All right, time for a Hail Mary, Jax decided, reloading his blaster and steeling himself for the sprint to the central console. Just gotta outrun a mad scientist and his death machines. Easy, right? He moved, sprinting across the chamber with all the grace of a drunken gazelle, laser fire nipping at his heels. He reached the console and slammed his hand down on the controls, fingers dancing over buttons and switches in a desperate bid to find the right combination. The room shuddered again, another quake threatening to bring the whole place crashing down. Panic clawed at Jax's mind, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. "Come on, you piece of junk," he muttered, ignoring the warning lights that blazed angrily in his peripheral vision. "Give me something here." His fingers found a switch labeled Emergency Override, and without a second thought he flipped it. The turrets sputtered, hesitated, then fell silent, their lights dimming as they powered down. Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Well, that's one problem down," he said, turning to face Saren, who was still safely ensconced behind thick glass. "You think this changes anything?" Saren sneered, his facade of calm slipping just a bit. "You're still outmatched, outgunned." Jax grinned, the kind of grin that suggested he was up to no good. "Maybe, but the way I see it, you're running out of toys to play with." Saren's eyes darted to the consoles, his mind working furiously to regain the upper hand. But Jax had already moved, charging the booth with blaster raised. The doctor barely had time to react as Jax barreled in, the door flying open under the force of Jax's shoulder. Saren stumbled back, surprise etched on his features. "Sorry to crash your party," Jax said, aiming the blaster squarely at Saren. "But I'm just not that into you." Saren glared, his bravado wavering. "You think you've won. The weapon isn't as simple as a few switches and buttons, Vander." "Probably not," Jax replied, tossing Saren a pair of restraints. "But for now, you're coming with me. We've got a date with destiny, or at least a really big explosion." Saren scoffed but complied, knowing when he was beat, at least for the moment. "You're insane, you know that." Jax shrugged, leading the way out of the control booth. "Yeah, but it's worked out for me so far. Now let's go save or blow up the universe, depending on how lucky we get." Jax Vander paced the control booth like a caged animal, his mind racing through the increasingly grim scenarios that lay ahead. Saren, looking like a deflated balloon of smugness, sat cuffed to a chair, his eyes dripping disdain. "So, Vander, what's the plan?" Saren asked, voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that'd make a black hole feel inadequate. "Are we sitting here until the planet decides it's bored of us?" "I'm weighing my options," Jax shot back. "Not that they're promising, but hey, what's life without a bit of mortal peril?" The planet wasn't just unstable. It was actively hostile, like a hangry toddler with a vendetta. Every few minutes, tremors would rattle through the facility, sending dust raining down from the ceiling and making every piece of machinery around them groan like creaky old men. Jax fiddled with the console, shooting Saren a look. "You know, you'd think with all your genius, you'd have thought about reinforcing this death trap." Saren smirked, as much as his situation allowed. "I prefer to think of it as a natural selection filter. Only the truly worthy get to experience the glory of this place. Or the truly unlucky," Jax muttered under his breath. He tapped at the console again, trying to pull up something useful. Anything that might give him an edge. But most of the screens were blank, and the few that did light up provided little more than error messages. It was like trying to read a novel when all you had was the table of contents in a foreign language. "Come on," There's gotta be something, Jax mumbled to himself, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. The legendary weapon of great power was somewhere in the bowels of this place, and here he was, playing tech support and failing miserably. Behind him, Saren chuckled softly. "You're in way over your head, Vander. Do you even know what you're dealing with?" Jax turned from the console, leveling a flat look at the doctor. "Not a clue. But that's never stopped me before." He was lying through his teeth, of course. The uncertainty was gnawing at him, and if there was one thing Jax hated more than getting shot at, it was not knowing what came next. He knew the weapon was more than just another piece of tech. It was supposed to be a game changer, with the power to tip the balance in any conflict. That kind of power made people stupid and greedy, two qualities Jax had in abundance but preferred to at least keep under wraps. And then the ground shook again, harder this time, like the planet was throwing a tantrum. A deep rumble followed, the kind that made Jax's bones vibrate and his instincts scream at him to run. He had to get moving, had to get something done, or he'd be buried under a mountain of debris and regret. "All right, enough of this," Jax said, more to himself than to Saren. "Time to pull a solution out of thin air." Saren raised an eyebrow, the picture of skepticism. "And how do you plan to do that?" "With my legendary wit and charm, obviously," Jax replied, glancing around the booth for anything useful. His eyes landed on the comlink, still crackling with static. An idea not fully formed but promising enough flickered to life. He grabbed the comlink, fiddling with its settings, hoping against hope that he could get through to the misfit. The ship might be a rust bucket with delusions of grandeur, but it was his rust bucket, and more importantly, it had a few tricks up its sleeve. "Misfit, come in," he said, adjusting the frequency. "Misfit, you rusty bucket of bolts, answer me." For a moment there was only static, the sound of his desperation echoing back at him. Then the crackling cleared and a voice filtered through, tinny but recognizable. "Jax, that you? Thought you'd gotten yourself vaporized or something." Jax grinned, relief washing over him. "Still kicking, though not for lack of trying. I need you to patch into the facilities system, see if you can give me control over some of these natural selection filters. Going for the hero angle, huh?" The voice on the other end was laced with amusement. "All right, give me a second. Gonna need to bypass their security." "Hold tight. Take your time, it's not like we're on a dying planet or anything," Jax replied, pacing in place. The humor was a thin veneer over the tension coiled in his gut, but it was all he had. Saren watched him, an inscrutable expression on his face. "What makes you think this will work?" he asked, not unkindly. Jax shrugged, focusing on the static slowly morphing into something more coherent. "Call it a hunch, or maybe I just have an unshakable belief in my own dumb luck." The room trembled again, another reminder that time was slipping away. Jax held his breath, willing the universe to cut him some slack for once. And then, like a miracle, the comms crackled with success. "All right, I'm in," the voice said. "What do you need me to do?" Jax exhaled, his mind racing with possibilities. "Shut down any traps, turrets, and tripwires you can find. And if there's a self-destruct sequence, see if you can dial it back a notch. I'd rather not end up an interstellar pancake, got it? Just keep your head down, yeah, always do," Jax replied, a smile tugging at his lips. He cut the connection, turning back to Saren, who looked vaguely impressed despite himself. "So still think I'm in over my head?" Jax asked, feeling the faintest flicker of confidence. "You've bought yourself some time," Saren admitted begrudgingly. "But the weapon, it's not going to let you just waltz in and take it." "Yeah, well, nobody ever told me I couldn't dance," Jax retorted, more bravado than truth. The facility thrummed with redirected power, lights flickering as the systems rebooted under the Misfits' guidance. Jax felt a small measure of control return, a thread he could pull on in the vast tapestry of chaos around him. "Okay, let's go see what all this fuss is about," Jax said, gesturing for Saren to move. The doctor hesitated, a flicker of fear crossing his face before he masked it with indifference. "Don't suppose I have a choice," Saren replied, rising from his chair. Not unless you want to sit here and wait for the roof to cave in, Jack said, leading the way out of the booth. The corridors beyond were eerily silent, the echoes of their footsteps the only sound as they moved deeper into the facility. Jax felt the weight of the place pressing down on him, a tangible reminder of the stakes. Saren spoke again, his voice low. There's something you should know about the weapon. It's not just a machine, it's alive in a way. Sentient. Jack stopped in his tracks, whipping around to face Saren. You're telling me this now, figured you'd find out sooner or later, Saren replied, a smirk ghosting across his lips. Besides, what's life without a few surprises? Jax groaned, rubbing a hand over his face. You know, I've always been fond of surprises. Just not the kind that come with a side of existential dread. They pushed onward, the path sloping downward into the depths of the facility. The air grew colder, tinged with a metallic tang that made Jax's skin crawl. So, any other bombshells you want to drop on me? Jax asked, trying to keep the mood light. Just focus, Vander, Saren replied, his voice tight. We're almost there. They reached a set of doors, their surfaces smooth and unblemished, as if mocking the dilapidation around them. Jax hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment. He was about to come face to face with the thing everyone wanted, the thing that had upended his life. Time to meet the belle of the ball, Jax said, trying to shake off the nerves. He stepped forward, pressing his hand against the control panel. The doors slid open with a hiss, revealing a chamber bathed in a soft, eerie glow. In the center stood the weapon, a sleek, enigmatic construct that seemed to pulse with its own life. It was beautiful and terrifying, an apex predator wrapped in allure. Jax approached, senses on high alert. So this is it, he murmured, half to himself, half to Saren. The doctor nodded, his gaze fixed on the weapon. It's more than a weapon, Vander. It's a consciousness, an entity. Well, isn't that just peachy, Jax said, circling the construct. Any advice on how to introduce myself without getting vaporized? Saren shook his head. You're on your own for this part, but remember, it's not just about power. It's about control. Jax took a deep breath, stepping closer to the weapon. He could feel it, a presence brushing against his mind, assessing him. It was like staring into the abyss and having it stare back unimpressed. All right, you sentient death machine, Jax said, voice firm despite the tremor in his gut. I'm not here to fight. I just want to talk. For a moment, nothing happened. Jax held his breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But then a voice, cool and curious, echoed in his mind. You are not like the others. Jax blinked, taken aback. Yeah, well, I like to think of myself as an original. The presence seemed to consider this, curiosity threading through its response. Why do you seek me, honestly? Mostly to keep you out of the wrong hands, Jax replied. And you know, maybe save the universe in the process. No biggie. The weapon's consciousness shifted, a ripple of amusement. You are interesting. Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, feeling the tension ease just a fraction. Thanks. I try. Behind him, Saren watched, an expression of disbelief mingling with grudging respect. So what now? Jax asked the entity, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie. Do we just sing Kumbaya and call it a day? The weapon's voice was warmer now, less alien. I think, perhaps, we find a way to ensure no one can misuse my power. Sounds like a plan, Jax agreed, relief washing over him like a tidal wave. As the planet shuddered around them, a new path opened before Jax, one he never could have predicted, but one he was more than willing to walk. With the weapon's consciousness at his side, he felt something he hadn't in a long time, a flicker of hope, buried beneath layers of cynicism and gallows humor. It was a start, and for Jax Vander, that was more than enough. Jax stared at the weapon, his mind doing somersaults trying to grasp the concept of a consciousness in a metal shell. Who knew the universe's most dangerous weapon would also be its most enigmatic conversationalist? Just when I thought cosmic irony couldn't get any richer, Jax muttered. Saren was still lurking behind him, probably plotting a betrayal or mentally composing an I told you so speech. Either way, Jax knew he couldn't trust him. Not with the stakes this high, not when the weapon was clearly more than just a hunk of metal with an attitude. So, You got any special tricks up your sleeve? Jax asked the weapon, hoping it had a few more surprises that didn't involve vaporizing him. Our connection allows access to vast knowledge and capabilities, the entity replied, a hint of amusement in its tone. Though I imagine you're more interested in how not to die in the next 5 minutes, Jax chuckled. You know me so well already. It's like we're practically best friends. Saren cleared his throat, bringing the focus back to the immediate problem. Vander, this isn't a game. The Shadow Collective will stop at nothing to get their hands on the weapon. You need a plan. Already got one, Jax said, turning to face Saren. Step 1, don't die. Step 2, make sure you don't screw me over, Saren smirked, the kind that made Jax want to punch him and buy him a drink simultaneously. And how do you propose to enforce that? Simple. You help me keep this thing out of the wrong hands, or I let the planet's next tantrum rearrange your face. Permanently. The facility shuddered as if to emphasize his point. Saren's eyes flicked to the ceiling, where dust rained down like a grim confetti. Well, when you put it that way, Jax nodded, satisfied. Good. Now let's figure out how to keep the collective busy while I have a chat with our new friend here. The weapon's presence in his mind was a strange comfort, like an invisible ally in a room full of enemies. You may access my systems to create a distraction, it offered. Perhaps a few explosive surprises would be entertaining. Explosive surprises. You really do know how to party, Jax said, grinning. All right, let's make some noise. He began fiddling with the weapon's interface, the alien symbols rearranging themselves into something his brain could parse. It was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube with a blindfold, but he was getting there. As Jax worked, Saren hovered, a shadow of uncertainty crossing his face. You really think you can outmaneuver them with this? I've got a knack for doing the impossible, Jax replied, not looking up. Or at least dying in spectacular fashion trying. The ground shook again, and this time the facility's structural integrity seemed to make a desperate plea for mercy. Jax kept his balance, his fingers moving with a speed that surprised even him. He activated a sequence, and the chamber's lights flickered, changing hue like a mood ring in a crisis. The weapons systems hummed, a symphony of chaos that resonated through the facility, sending tremors of confusion through the collective's ranks above. Well, that should keep them busy for a bit, Jax said, standing back. Now let's talk about that escape plan. Escape? Saren asked, incredulous. We're surrounded, Vander. Even if you could blast a path through, they'll be waiting, which is why we're not going out guns blazing, Jax countered. We're going to take the scenic route. Saren raised an eyebrow. And what, pray tell, is the scenic route? The misfit, of course, Jax replied, a twinkle of mischief in his eyes. You didn't think I'd leave my beauty parked in orbit without a trick or two ready to go, did you? He activated his comlink, hoping the misfit AI hadn't gone into a digital sulk. Misfit, you there? A pause, then the familiar, exasperated voice crackled through. Where else would I be, genius? You need something. Activate Plan B, Jax instructed, his tone all business. And make it loud, Plan B, huh? Thought you'd save that for a special occasion, Misfit replied, a hint of grudging respect in its voice. All right, consider the welcome mats rolled out. What's Plan B? Saren asked, his skepticism only partially masked by curiosity. Jax smirked. Plan B is what happens when everything goes to hell, and I need to make an exit that doesn't involve getting shot, stabbed, or otherwise mutilated. The facility shuddered again, but this time it was accompanied by a low, rumbling whine as the Misfits' engines roared into action. Jax could practically hear the collective's confusion as the ship's automated weapons targeted their positions with precision. It's showtime, Jax said, gesturing for Saren to follow. Time to give them a run for their money. They moved quickly, Jax leading the way through the labyrinthine corridors, the weapon's guidance subtly nudging him away from danger. He could feel its presence as a steadying hand on his shoulder, a silent promise of aid. How's that sentient death machine plan working out for you? Saren quipped, doing his best to keep up. Better than expected, Jax replied, not breaking stride. You know, you're not half bad when you're not being a colossal prick, thanks. I think, Saren said, his expression a strange mix of annoyance and amusement. As they approached the facility's entrance, the sound of blaster fire and shouted orders echoed down the corridors. The collective's forces were regrouping, determined to corner their prey. "Looks like they're rolling out the welcome wagon," Jax muttered, checking his blaster. "Time for Plan C. Let me guess," Saren said dryly. "Plan C is just Plan A with more explosions." Jax grinned. "You catch on quick." They reached the entrance, and the Misfit swooped into view, its boarding ramp descending amidst a flurry of dust and debris. The ship's guns blazed, providing the cover they needed as they sprinted towards safety. "Misfit, you beautiful bucket of bolts, don't ever change," Jax said, vaulting onto the ramp with Saren close behind. "Wouldn't dream of it," Misfit replied, the AI voice tinged with satisfaction. As the ramp closed, sealing them inside, Jax felt the familiar thrum of the ship's engines beneath his feet. It was a sound that spoke of survival, of just barely scraping by one more time. "Well, that was fun," Jax said, slumping into a seat in the cockpit. "Let's never do it again." Saren, for once, seemed at a loss for words. He sank into a seat opposite Jax, a weary look in his eyes. "I'll admit I didn't think you'd pull it off." "Well, I'll admit I had my doubts too," Jax replied, flashing a tired grin. "But look at us now. Two unlikely allies, a sentient weapon, and a ship that's due for about 1,000 repairs." The Misfits' engines flared, lifting them off the unstable surface and carrying them away from the chaos below. The weapon's presence lingered in Jax's mind, a reminder that their journey was far from over. "So, what's next?" Saren asked, his voice edged with reluctant respect. "Next," Jax echoed, leaning back with a sigh. "Next, we figure out how to keep this weapon safe, make sure the collective can't use it to blow up half the universe." "It's a tall order," Saren said, a note of bleak humor in his voice. "You sure you're up for it?" Jax chuckled, shaking his head. "Hell no. But when has that ever stopped me?" The stars stretched out before them, a tapestry of endless possibilities and equally endless threats. But for now, they had a moment of respite, a chance to catch their breath before the next storm hit. And in that brief, fragile peace, Jax couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, they had a fighting chance. Jax Vander had a knack for finding himself knee-deep in systems that wanted him dead. It wasn't exactly a talent he'd put on a resume, but in the grim corners of space, it paid the bills, most of the time. As the Misfits' engines vibrated through his boots, he couldn't help but think how he'd yet again managed to avoid becoming space dust. Barely. The Misfit cruised through the black, and Jax could feel the tension ease out of his shoulders. For the moment, they were safe. Safe being a relative term when you were sitting on what amounted to a nuclear bomb with opinions. "Misfit," Jax said, leaning back into his cockpit chair, "we good on fuel, or is that another thing I'm gonna have to worry about?" "Fuel levels are adequate," the AI replied, a touch of sarcasm in its tone. "Just try not to start any interstellar dogfights yet." "Only if they shoot first," Jax muttered. "I'm not here to make friends." Speaking of unfriendly company, he turned to Saren, sitting across from him, fiddling with a console as if rearranging virtual deck chairs on the Titanic. "So, Doc, you still planning on stabbing me in the back, or did the last stunt change your mind?" Saren gave a smile that looked about as sincere as a politician's promise. "Depends on which way the wind's blowing, Jax." "You did impress me back there, though. Didn't know you had a plan C." Jax grinned, scratching his chin. "Never count out plans D through Z either. I'm full of surprises." "More like full of something else," Saren quipped before turning serious. "But honestly, what do we do about the weapon? We can't just keep it on board and hope it doesn't decide it wants to redecorate the ship by blowing it up." The weapon, its consciousness still buzzing in Jax's mind, interjected. "You can trust me. I assure you that mutual destruction would be counterproductive." Jax rolled his eyes, tapping his head with a knuckle. "Heard that, did you? Guess that answers the eavesdropping question." "Listening, not eavesdropping." "Two very different things," the weapon corrected with a hint of smugness. "Right, like pretending to be deaf at a bad party," Jax shot back. But you've got a point, Saren. We can't just sit on this thing forever. The ship's AI decided now was a great time to chime in. You know, holding onto a sentient weapon is kind of like babysitting a dragon. It might be cool, but sooner or later you're gonna get burned. Jax laughed, a short, sharp bark. And here I thought you were the optimistic one, Misfit. Realism isn't pessimism, Captain, the AI retorted. Just trying to keep my hull intact, thank you very much. Jack sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. All right, we need a plan. Something that doesn't involve us getting vaporized or worse. Saren leaned in, his expression thoughtful for once. What about the failsafe? The legends mention something like that, right? Maybe the weapon's own consciousness can deactivate it. Ah yes, the legendary failsafe, Jax mused, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Because ancient weapons are always equipped with handy-off switches. There's more truth to that than you know, the weapon said, its voice echoing in Jax's skull. I do possess a failsafe, though activating it requires a unique perspective. Unique perspective? Jax asked, suddenly intrigued. What, like a Sudoku puzzle? More like a test of character, the weapon replied. You must demonstrate that you understand the true cost of power. Jax exchanged a look with Saren, who shrugged. Sounds about as straightforward as a Gordian knot. Yeah, and we all know how that one was solved, Jax muttered. All right, consciousness, what's the test? The weapon was silent for a moment, the pause heavy with anticipation. Then it spoke, its tone grave. Imagine a scenario where your only choices are to save one or save many. What is the price of sacrifice? Jax closed his eyes, thinking hard. The answer seemed simple enough on the surface, but the weight of it bore down like a physical force. You're asking if I'd sacrifice the few for the many, right? Correct, the weapon confirmed. But it is not enough to say it. You must mean it. Jax frowned, feeling the truth of it. He thought about the people he'd lost, the ones he'd saved. Every choice had a consequence, and every consequence had a price. All right, Jax said slowly. I mean it. I do what I have to save the many. There is your answer, the weapon said, and Jax felt a strange warmth, a shift within his mind. Well, Saren said, breaking the silence, that was anticlimactic. Not everything needs fireworks, Jax replied, standing up and stretching. Sometimes you just need the right words. You know, for a guy who mouths off a lot, you're surprisingly introspective, Saren admitted. Layers, Doc, like an onion, Jax said, smirking. Don't peel them all at once unless you want tears. The ship continued its course, stars slipping by with a calmness that belied the turmoil of moments before. It was almost peaceful, the kind of peace that made you look over your shoulder just in case it was a trap. So, now what? Saren asked, glancing at the controls as if the answer might be hiding in the readouts. Jax shrugged. We do what we do best. Keep moving, stay one step ahead of everyone else. You know, the weapon said, a hint of admiration in its voice, you humans have a remarkable ability to adapt. It's your greatest strength. Jax chuckled, patting the console affectionately. Yeah, well, it's either that or we blow ourselves up. Adapt or die, right? Certainly a philosophy to live by, Saren said, nodding. And speaking of living, how about we head somewhere a bit more populated? I've had enough of empty planets and killer storms. Sounds like a plan, Jax agreed. Misfit, plot a course for somewhere with a bar. I could use a drink that doesn't come with a side of imminent doom. Consider it done, Misfit said, the engines shifting as the ship adjusted its course. And Captain, try not to get into too much trouble. No promises, Jax replied, grinning. But I'll try to avoid the life-threatening kind. The stars outside were a blur, streaks of light against the vast darkness. It was a sight Jax never got tired of, the endless expanse reminding him there was always more out there, always another adventure waiting just beyond the horizon. To new beginnings, Saren said, raising an imaginary glass. To surviving them, Jax added, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied sigh. For now they had a weapon with a conscience, a ship with attitude, and a galaxy full of possibilities. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And really, what more could a man ask for? Well, Jax said, closing his eyes and letting the hum of the engines lull him into a rare moment of peace, Let's see what tomorrow brings. Hopefully something that doesn't try to kill us. Hopefully, Misfit echoed, the AI voice light with humor. But with you at the helm, I wouldn't bet on it. Jax laughed, the sound echoing through the cockpit. Fair enough. Here's to the next close call. And as the ship sailed on through the stars, leaving behind one chapter and racing headlong into the next, Jax Vander couldn't help but feel a little bit grateful. Grateful for his mismatched crew, his sentient weapon, and even for the cynical AI that wouldn't stop nagging him. Because in the end, maybe that was what life was all about. Not just surviving, but finding reasons to keep at it, despite the odds. And as far as Jax was concerned, those odds were looking pretty good. The misfit coasted through the void like a cosmic stray dog that had finally found a bone worth gnawing. Jax Vander leaned back in his chair, boots propped up, eyes scanning the endless black canvas outside the cockpit window. He felt a strange sense of calm, like a storm had passed and left him standing in the midst of its wreckage, alive and kicking. "Saren, you still breathing back there?" he called over his shoulder, breaking the silence with his usual irreverent flair. "Unfortunately for you, yeah," Saren shot back, sounding like he'd rather chew glass than admit he was glad to be alive. He was hunched over a console, the faint glow giving his smirk an extra edge of insufferability. "You know, Jax, if I didn't know any better, I'd say we just pulled off the impossible." "Yeah, well, don't go riding home about it. Nothing like a little existential dread to start the day." Jax ran a hand through his hair, trying to process the roller coaster they'd just survived. "So, what's the status on our planet-sized headache?" Saren tapped a few keys, squinting at the results. "Looks like the weapon's failsafe did the trick. The tremors have stopped and the planet's not about to implode. Congrats, we might just live long enough to regret all our life choices." The AI misfit took the opportunity to weigh in with its usual sarcasm. "I'll have you know, keeping this ship running is like trying to keep a drunken elephant on a tightrope. But yes, the planet appears stable, at least for now." Jax exhaled, a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Nice to know we're not about to become cosmic debris. For a second there, I thought we'd end up as a cautionary tale in some what not to do manual." "You're assuming anyone would bother writing about us," Misfit cut in with a chuckle, if an AI could chuckle. "Besides, who reads manuals these days?" Jax snorted. "True enough. All right, let's get down to brass tacks. This weapon of yours is disarmed, but we've still got the Shadow Collective breathing down our necks. What's our next move?" Saren leaned back, crossing his arms like he was getting comfy in someone else's misery. "Simple. We don't stick around to see what their welcoming committee looks like. We bounce." Jax nodded, feeling the weight of the decision. "Sounds like a plan. As much as I enjoy living on the edge, I'd rather not get shoved over it." The weapon, silent until now, piped up. "I must say I am impressed. Many have tried to wield me, but few have understood the cost." "Yeah, well, we're a special kind of stupid," Jax replied, glancing at the console where the weapon's consciousness resided. "Don't get too comfortable. This isn't a permanent gig." "You have my word," the weapon assured, and Jax could almost hear the sincerity, or maybe that was just wishful thinking. "Right, because a sentient weapon's word is as solid as a politician's campaign promises," Saren muttered under his breath, rolling his eyes. "Hey, I've been known to take a leap of faith now and then," Jax said, turning back to the windows. "Besides, it's not like we have a ton of options. We play the cards we're dealt. And what a hand it is," Misfit added dryly. "Still, with the weapon pacified, we might just have a shot at some semblance of normalcy. Assuming, of course, that's what we're aiming for." "Normalcy is overrated," Jax quipped. "But yeah, a little peace and quiet wouldn't hurt, at least until the next crisis hits." "Speaking of crises," Saren interjected, "let's talk about that fuel situation. We're not exactly flush, and I'd rather not be adrift in the middle of nowhere." "Point taken," Jax agreed, glancing at the fuel gauge. "Misfit, find us the closest pit stop, preferably one that doesn't come with a side of interstellar hostilities." "On it," the AI replied, plotting a course for the nearest station. With any luck, they'll be more interested in our credits than our heads. Luck, Jax mused, is a fickle mistress, but I've got a knack for charming her pants off when it counts. Saren gave him a look that screamed disbelief. You're about as charming as a used blaster. Hey, it works, Jax grinned, swinging his feet off the console and standing up. Let's get moving. The sooner we're away from this rock, the better. As Misfit adjusted its course, the ship's engines thrumming to life, Jax felt a pang of nostalgia for the mess they just narrowly survived. It was the kind of chaos that made you feel alive, even when it was trying to kill you. Ever think about settling down? Saren asked, out of the blue, catching Jax off guard. Jax laughed, the sound more bark than melody. Only when I'm feeling suicidal. Why, you thinking of setting up a nice little homestead somewhere? Saren shook his head, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Nah, just curious. You're an enigma, Jax, hard to pin down. That's the idea, Jax replied cryptically. Too many people try to pin you down and you end up in a coffin. Cheery thought, Saren said, the sarcasm thick enough to choke on. Just keeping it real, Jax shrugged. Besides, the galaxy's too big to stay in one place. Always something new around the corner. Hopefully not a corner filled with cannibals or mercenaries, Misfit added, its voice tinged with mock optimism. Hey, I can dream, can't I? Jax leaned against the bulkhead, staring out at the swirling stars. A man's gotta have dreams. And nightmares, apparently, Saren commented. Good thing we've got each other to keep the nightmares at bay. Jax turned to him, a grin splitting his face. Sentimental much, Doc. Careful, or I might start thinking you actually like me. Like is a strong word, Saren replied, a smirk in his voice. But you're not the worst company I've ever kept. High praise, Jax said, pushing off from the wall. All right, let's get to that station and see if we can't patch up the Misfit and our sorry selves. As they sailed through the black, a quiet camaraderie settled between them. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And in the vast, uncaring universe, that was something worth holding onto. The Misfit drifted toward the distant glimmer of a space station, a beacon in the void promising respite and resources. Jax watched it grow larger in the viewport, a small smirk playing on his lips. They might be bruised, battered, and a little singed around the edges, but they were still here, still kicking, and for the time being that was enough. So, drinks on me, Jax offered as they prepared to dock. Saren chuckled, shaking his head. I'll hold you to that, Vander. Just try not to start a brawl. We've had enough excitement for one lifetime. No promises, Jax replied, the mischievous glint in his eye betraying his words. But I'll do my best to behave. Your best is still pretty terrible, Captain, Misfit pointed out dryly. Hey, everyone's a critic, Jax shot back, unperturbed. Now let's go see what this station has to offer. I'm in the mood for something with a kick. As the docking sequence initiated, Jax felt a sense of anticipation bubbling up. The future was uncertain, the past a tangled mess of victories and regrets. But the present was a gift, and he intended to make the most of it. To new beginnings, Jax murmured, echoing Saren's earlier toast, as the Misfit settled into its berth with a final, satisfying thud. To surviving them, Saren replied, clapping Jax on the shoulder as they prepared to disembark. And as the crew stepped onto solid ground, leaving behind the chaos and uncertainty of the past, they looked forward with cautious optimism. The galaxy awaited, full of dangers, delights, and the delicious unpredictability of life on the edge. Here's to the next misadventure, Jax said with a grin, leading the way. Together they walked into the unknown, the stars their guide and the promise of tomorrow their only certainty. And in the end, that was all they needed.